Good evening, fantasy football fans. This is Scott Spratt, joined by Michael Moore. Welcome to another episode of the Fantasy Slant, powered by ProFootballFocus.com Fantasy, and brought to you by DraftKings. Michael, it's been an exciting couple of weeks of preseason that I've missed out on entirely. I at least had an excuse this weekend as I was away at a conference, but I can't say for sure that I would have watched any in any case. But I hope you've had a good time watching the games on your end, and you can kind of get me up to speed. And I can just basically talk you down if you think anything that happened really mattered that much.
You mean like Jimmy Clausen pulling ahead, or no?
Well, that's what I was going to ask you. Clausen watches on. How is he doing? Is he going to lock up that second quarterback spot in Chicago or not?
I'll just read you his line from last week. 7-10, 56 yards, no touchdowns, and an interception. However, I think he's still probably ahead of Jordan Palmer, which isn't saying a whole lot. So I think the spot is secure for now, Scotty.
Well, I'm very excited, obviously. There's nothing that I want more from this season than Clausen getting some real playing time. So best of luck, Jimmy. We're cheering for you. Okay, tonight, even though I have some disdain for the preseason, I think it's important that we talk through some of the major storylines, if only to debunk them as being relevant. And some of them I think we're probably going to say probably matter, especially ones that involve personnel moves and those sorts of things. So, Michael, we tried to split this up between AFC and NFC, giving 5 each before the show, and I just couldn't handle it. I just went all over the place. I'm out of control. I apologize for that.
You had too many hot sports takes, Scott. So.
Evidently. But so because of that, I'm going to just be going all over the place. Who knows what, when, or why. So, prepare for that, everybody.
Who knows where we'll end up, Scott? I don't know, and it's exciting.
Yeah, I think you're right. So without further ado, Michael, let's just hit to some random topics and see how far they take us. Okay, number one question, along the lines of the Jimmy Clausen watch. Should we start the Blake Bortles watch? Is he the new amazing quarterback of the year?
It's so disappointing, and I'll tell you why I say that. I love Blake Bortles. I loved him going into rookie drafts. I drafted him in rookie drafts with the explicit intent on taxing him, never using him, and just waiting for 2015. But now, thanks to Blake Bortles and his awesomeness, apparently, he's probably going to start, and probably going to start early, which is really, good for him and good for the Jaguars, blah, blah, blah. But it's not good for my fantasy team, Scott, at least not my dynasty team.
To be clear, there's really no reason why he shouldn't start. It's not like Chad Henne is waiting for his last hurrah to just demonstrate that he can really do this, right? It's the argument of whether or not you can damage yourself by playing early, maybe when you aren't fully ready, which
right.
I don't really buy into personally. I don't know if you do, Michael. But yeah, I feel like Bortles was a value in dynasty formats. I got him once as a third-round rookie pick for a guy that's sort of on the list of maybe 3 guys that looks like a starter this year. It seems like a pretty strong value. I assume he's probably going to be moving up the list, but did he pass either of the other 2 quarterbacks in front of him in your mind among the rookies?
Yeah, actually he did.
Really?
I liked him before too, but and look, Manziel had a good night or a good couple games. He I think proved what he can do. Bridgewater is still sort of coming along, but yeah, Bortles so far of the 3 has had the best preseason, no questions asked. So, yeah.
But you would draft him over those other 2 guys?
I probably would. I think he's probably going to start. And look, we're going to see him start in the third preseason game, or not start in the third game, but he's going to get first-team reps. And barring just a complete face plant, he's probably going to do just as well as he's done. And I think they're going to have a hard decision week 1 of the regular season if they have to explain to people that they're still starting Chad Henne for some reason.
I can't see drafting Bortles ahead of Manziel at all, especially given his ability to rush the ball. I guess if you're talking about a dynasty format and you're talking about long career, maybe you could move Bortles up. And I don't have any particular attachment to Teddy Bridgewater, but this doesn't really move the needle that much for me. I don't think he's going to be usable as a fantasy player this year. So if he's no longer a value, then I'm just not going to draft him. But I don't really know what else to say about that, really.
Yeah, I'm this close to buying my Blake Bortles jersey, Scott. So we'll see how it goes.
You should buy that regardless of whether you want to draft him.
Well, that's true. That's true.
Okay, let's move on from that and reach back a little bit because I think you and Joey talked about this a bit last week, and thanks to you both for filling in for me while I've been out. Um, but the Texans cut Andre Brown, which I think everybody assumed was going to be the backup behind Arian Foster, and is a guy that's actually been kind of good when he's been healthy enough to play in recent seasons, most recently with the Giants. That promotes Jonathan Grimes to second on the depth chart. Rookie Alfred Blue is there. The team signed Ronnie Brown. Do you see any fantasy relevance for any of these players behind Arian Foster right now, Michael?
Yeah, because it's still Arian Foster. He's gonna get hurt at some point, that's sort of his MO now at this point. Is the guy just can't stay healthy, which is really unfortunate because when he's healthy and he's on, I mean, he's a top 3, top 5 running back in all of fantasy football. So. And look, let's face it, that's why Andre Brown's value was so high heading into preseason there was a high probability he was going to have to be used at some point. So I think whoever wins the backup job there I think they're going to be in line to have some value there. And look, if you subscribe to the theory that, Bill O'Brien and he's going to bring some of that New England element to Houston, it's not like New England had a bell cow in the years that O'Brien was the offensive coordinator there either. I mean, they did split up carries pretty good. So, yeah, I think it's still probably a little unsettled on who's going to win that job, but I think whoever does ultimately is going to have some value there.
Okay, so I disagree with you entirely here. I think this is going to move into a broader discussion about handcuff strategy in general.
Oh, no.
I think Foster is a tremendous player, and I think it's his ability that makes him the standout player that he is. And given that there's no clarity behind him, I don't really want to draft any of those backups, even if I have Foster, because I feel like I'm mostly throwing away a roster spot when I could be drafting a player that I think has upside on his own merits. I think this is a mistake that some fantasy owners do when they have an elite running back on their team, a guy who's getting all of the touches for their team. They want to grab a handcuff even where a handcuff may not exist. So basically what I'm saying is I think the talent in the backup equation matters as well as the role, and that's something that you really need to consider before you just blindly take a backup for this. And I think it's worthwhile. Why don't we get down? Okay, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, no, and that's a completely valid point. I think a lot of it depends on how big your rosters are. So, like you said, if you're standard league, 15 players, I think there's some truth to that. Meaning, you don't want to necessarily waste, 6 to 7% of your roster on a guy that could not play it down or could be cut next week. I completely get that. I think you just got to look at how comfortable you are with the guys you drafted behind Foster. So, if you're able to get value for some running backs in maybe the 9th, 10th, 11th round, I'm with you. You don't need to go handcuff at all. But for some reason, if the chips don't fall that way, it's a last resort, I think, that's worth looking at.
And I should be clear that I'm really talking about shallower typical formats more than deeper formats. And I would say that in our case, if we're talking about dynasty leagues, which we generally are, a lot of those handcuffs or the people think are handcuffs are rookie players and probably do deserve being drafted as bench guys, even if they're not really handcuffs as such. But just for illustrative purposes, why don't we go through, I pulled up the Pro Football Focus redraft ranks, so we're talking about redraft, talking about it from sort of a standard league perspective. Michael, I'm just going to go down and list off the guys in order. Again, my draft ranks aren't even on here for this kind of format, so we'll just go with the consensus of guys on the site. I'm going to list who the starter is. You tell me whether you care about the backup or not, and I will tell you whether or not I agree.
Okay, this is a harsh sounding game, but I'm ready for it, Scott.
Okay, so number 1 is LaShawn McCoy. His backup is Chris Polk. Would you draft him as a handcuff?
Oh yes, all day.
I would not. Why would you draft Chris Polk as a handcuff?
I think Polk has some value on his own. Meaning, last year he had some talent last year in Washington. And look, with a guy like McCoy especially, I view it as sort of an investment, right? So McCoy, presuming you drafted him with the 1st or 2nd pick, that's a fairly large investment I think you've got. So I think, and again, we're talking, if we're talking shallow leagues and you're in your 14th, 15th round, I would take Polk, personally.
I mean, am I wrong about this? Does Polk have, 11 career carries? Was he undrafted? I feel like he was undrafted.
There's just a lot of tread left on the tire, Scott. That's how you have to look at that.
Sure, he's very fresh, but there's nothing to me that demonstrate that he would be effective in the role, even if he had it.
Sure. Well, and I think another thing for me that's in his favor is it's a Chip Kelly offense. They are a run-heavy offense. They're going to run the ball a lot. So, look, it's not to say I think Polk is going to challenge McCoy in any way, because it's not going to happen. But with the amount of times that I think they're expected to run this year, I think they could bring in Polk a little bit to spell some of that. And then obviously, if McCoy goes down for whatever reason, then you've got your backup. But
okay, so we disagreed there. Number 2, Jamal Charles, backup Nile Davis.
Ooh, for me,
this is bizarre to me. Okay.
Okay, you go first, Scott.
Yes.
You have.
Yes, I want Nile Davis.
Okay.
Yes, I want Nile Davis. He had 242 rushing yards, 4 touchdowns, 11 catches for 75 yards last year in very limited duty. He was very effective when he had the opportunity.
And I just so we agree on something, I would agree with you on that. Okay. And for me, I'm definitely a very conservative fantasy player. And look, I realize it's been a couple years since Jamal Charles has recovered from some pretty devastating knee injuries, but to me, it's still in the back of my mind. So yeah, I would, and especially if it's the clear-cut backup, like Nile Davis, meaning it's not a Houston type situation where they're still battling it out. Yeah, sure. I would take Davis.
Okay. Number 3, Adrian Peterson. Would you take his backup? Do you know who his backup is? Because I'm not sure I do. It's either Matt Asiata or maybe it's Jerick McKinnon, the rookie.
I was going to say, for me, it depends on who that is. So if it's McKinnon, I would take him in redraft or dynasty formats, especially in dynasty formats. Asiata, I would probably pass on that. But McKinnon, I think, to your point earlier, he's a rookie, so I think there's probably some value there. And yeah, I would probably take McKinnon on that one.
Okay, I wouldn't. It's because of the lack of clarity of the job for me. Matt Forte, and this is sort of hitting on probably another major topic here, in that rookie Kadeem Carey presumably hasn't successfully won this backup role.
Right.
Talk about that a little bit, Michael, just like as a quick aside. What do you think about Carey? And then do you think either he or Sean Drawn, former Carolina legend, by the way, would either of them be worth a fantasy pick?
So on Carey, that's just disappointing, I think. I mean, personally, I was really looking forward to him taking that job and running with it, meaning the backup job. I mean, they haven't had a decent backup to Matt Forte, I think, in all the years he's been there. So, and look, it seemed like they were finally wising up to the fact that Matt Forte is not going to live forever. So they used a pretty high pick on Carey. I think it was a 3rd or 4th round pick, but yeah, to not have him be able to beat out Sean Drone is just disappointing. So, in that scenario, I would probably pass on drafting that backup.
I agree. I want neither player. We're taking way too long with this, so let's go rapid fire. Give me a yes or no, and if we don't agree, then we can talk about it a little bit.
Okay.
Eddie Lacy is number 5.
Would it save time if I just said no to the rest of the list, Scott?
It would probably save time. Eddie Lacy, backup James Starks, yes or no?
No.
Okay, I say yes. Starks is one of my favorite handcuffs.
Okay.
DeMarco Murray, backup is Lance Dunbar, Joseph Randall.
Yes, I would all day.
No for me. I don't know which one it is. So this is hilarious. Marshawn Lynch, number 7, yes or no? Christian Michael.
Yes.
Okay, yes, but with a reservation that I'm really not sure that Michael would be clearly the guy. Robert Turbin still is there. He still gets a lot of work.
He is.
Monte Ball, number 8, backup C.J. Anderson, I guess?
Currently, right now, yeah, it's CJ. No, actually, it's Ronnie Hillman was getting carries before. Now, Hillman had a concussion, so it's a little dicey there at this point. But I probably not. I mean, looking at last year how they used Moreno. I mean, they almost exclusively used Moreno. It's not like they spelled him a whole lot. So I'd probably go Moreno. I mean, I would not choose the backup.
Yeah, I know what you meant there. That's cool. I say no as well. Le'Veon Bell, backup is
LeGarrette Blount?
LeGarrette Blount, yes.
Yeah, no, I'm good.
You don't want him?
No, I'm good.
Okay, I do.
Oh.
Arian Foster, we talked about him already. Giovanni
Yeah.
Bernard, I'm saying, is in a time workload split, so not a true handcuff situation. Do you agree?
Um, you know, I probably wouldn't. I think Gio's gonna be. I think Hill's gonna. Well, okay. Let me backtrack. Yeah, probably.
Okay. If you think that Bernard is clearly the guy and that he's going to get the full workload, then you really can't handcuff him because Hill is being drafted like a player that's a part of a timeshare in my mind.
Right.
So it's
Right.
just too expensive. Zach Stacy, backup is Benny Cunningham, Trey Mason, not sure. Do you
I
want the
probably would.
backup?
I probably would, only because and I think me and Joey may have talked about this, but I'm not entirely convinced Stacy's going to be the guy, whether it's this season or long term. I mean, he was a sub 4.0 yards per carry guy last year. That's what people need to realize. It's not like he blew the doors off. He was a volume guy. So yeah, I would probably take the backup in that scenario.
Okay. But that's not exactly I don't know what to say. But who do you want? Do you want Mason or do you want Cunningham?
Uh, I'd probably go Mason just because I think there's probably more potential there being a rookie. But, it could be 4 games in and turns out Trey Mason really can't pass block and I could change my mind. So.
Sure. I want neither backup.
Okay.
Alfred Morris. Do you want Roy Halou? Do you want...
No, I wouldn't. I think
No.
I think Morris is firmly entrenched there. I don't see anyone challenging him.
Great, we agree. Doug Martin. Do you want his backup? His backup being Charles Sims, Mike James, Bobby Rainey? I don't know.
Well, if it was Sims, I would have liked him, but Sims, I believe, hurt his ankle, and he's going to be out like a couple weeks, if not months now. So, I would say now, no, I would not.
No, I agree. Andre Ellington is someone else I think is in a timeshare. CJ Spiller, I think the same. Do you disagree on either case?
I'd probably disagree with Ellington.
Okay, and do you want Stephen Taylor? Do you want Jonathan Dwyer?
No,
Okay.
I would take Ellington by himself all day.
All right, I agree. Toby Gerhart, his backup is Storm Johnson,
One of
Denard
Storm
Robinson,
Johnson or Jordan Todman.
Jordan Todman. You don't want any of them, right?
Insert random player here. No, I would take Gerhard and run with it. I wouldn't mess with the backups there.
Agree. Ryan Matthews, I think, is in a timeshare. Disagree?
No, I'd agree.
Okay.
I'd agree.
Frank Gore, backup is Carlos Hyde, probably. Marcus Lattimore, possibly. Do you want?
I would definitely get the backup there. I think I'm not sold on Gore this year. I think the last half of last season really scared me. And I think, look, they drafted Hyde in the 2nd round. Kendall Hunter got hurt. Lattimore's still recovering. There is no one else. It's pretty much going to be, I think, the Carlos Hyde show pretty soon.
I agree. I want him too. Let's see. Rashad Jennings in New York. You have Andre Williams there as a backup. Do you want the backup?
No, I'd probably go Jennings, and that's it.
Okay. I think I probably do want Andre Williams there. Let's see. You got Shane Vereen in a timeshare, Reggie Bush in a timeshare, Ben Tate in a timeshare, Joique Bell in a timeshare, Steven Jackson in Atlanta. Do you want Devontae Freeman?
Yes, only because I've watched Hard Knocks now and I'm scared. So yes, I would take Devontae Freeman.
I would too. Lamar Miller in Miami is his backup. No Sean Moreno. Do you want Moreno or someone else?
If it's redraft, I might entertain that. For me, it seems like every year there's always the talk about Lamar Miller finally busting out, and until I see it, I won't believe it. And look, they signed Moreno in the offseason. Now, they didn't give him a ton of money, obviously, but no, I think they're going to find a way to work Moreno in there.
Okay, I really don't want anybody in Miami, but I think
I didn't know there was an answer C, Scott. I didn't know there was.
I think bad players, bad offensive line.
Right.
So no, for me. Ray Rice, I think that one's a little bit obvious because Bernard Pierce is starting 2 games, so I presume that you would definitely take Bernard Pierce.
Yeah. And I'm not convinced Bernard Pierce wouldn't be the starter going forward. He's looked really good in preseason so far.
Stephen Ridley, timeshare. Chris Johnson, timeshare. Trent Richardson. Do you want Ahmad Bradshaw?
Probably, because I think Ahmad Bradshaw is better than Trent Richardson, personally.
I might agree, but I still don't want either.
Right.
Bishop Sankey. Do you want Sean Green?
No, probably not.
I do.
Okay.
I think I've reached the end of the list. I think everybody else after this is definitely in a timeshare, so we went through like 32 guys there. That was terribly boring, and I apologize.
I think we agreed on less than half. So
yeah, that was hilarious. I mean, we really almost completely disagreed. I was going to then ask for us to rank them, but we're not going to have any kind of consensus. So why don't I just say who I think are the best, and then I'll let you say who you think are the best.
Okay.
If I were looking at handcuffs, just regardless of situation, obviously if I have a specific player, I want his handcuff most. But just ignoring that for a second, I think Bernard Pierce is number one because he's a guaranteed 2-week starter. Then I want Niall Davis, James Starks. I think there's a gap after that. And then I want Christian Michael and Carlos Hyde and Sean Green after that. Again, all talents are not created equal. I just think Michael's and Hyde's situations are a little murkier, and I think Green's is a little bit easier to get playing time. And I think those are sort of the standout 5 guys. Do you have a couple of guys at the top of your list that you think are the best handcuffs, regardless of who you actually have on your team?
I think, honestly, I think you hit on the ones I would pick. For me, Hyde's it. I mean, Hyde, and it all changed, I think, for me when Kendall Hunter went down. If Kendall Hunter was still practicing, still healthy, I wouldn't put Hyde in that group. But now, I mean, there's just no one else there. And look, they're a run-heavy team. They're going to run the ball a lot. And I love Frank Gore, and he's been Mr. Reliable, but I think this is finally the year that he doesn't have it. And I think Hyde starts probably by the end of the year, quite honestly.
Interesting. Okay. So, again, that was terrible, and I apologize. Let's move on to some better topics. I want to play a little game with you, Michael, which is, do you know Jonathan Stewart? So, Jonathan Stewart...
Or rather, which Jonathan Stewart do I know?
Okay, we're talking about the Carolina Panthers version of Jonathan Stewart, to be clear. He actually ran for 2 touchdowns in the preseason game. And when I first saw that, I was actually shocked that he even played. I had no idea. But playing a little game of do you know Jonathan Stewart, Michael, how old is Jonathan Stewart?
Oh, he's young. I'm going to say 25.
Okay. You're kind of getting along the right lines there. He's older than that. He's 27. But
okay, I was going to say 20.
I thought you were going to go older, and the point that I was making is that Stewart is, in fact, younger than Jamal Charles, just as an example.
Right.
Stewart broke into the NFL at a very young age, and so even though he's missed some time and been around since 2008, he's actually still relatively young.
Wow, 2008? Holy crap.
Yeah. Do you know when he was drafted? Not what year, but like where in the NFL draft?
I thought it was the 2nd round.
It was not. It was the 13th overall pick in 2008, so a mid-first round pick, in fact.
Wow.
Seriously.
Oh, that's horrible.
Do you know the most rushing touchdowns Jonathan Stewart has scored in a season in his career?
6.
10, which he has done twice already.
I'm so confused. I don't know Jonathan Stewart anymore. Or apparently I never did.
Ever. Do you know how many receptions are the most receptions Jonathan Stewart has ever had in a season?
50.
That's actually a really good guess. Okay, it's 47. Okay. I thought you were going to guess like 20. Which,
no. I knew he was a good receiving back. I knew that much.
To be clear, Stewart has only caught a lot of passes once, and even though he's a useful player in the screen game.
Was it the one season he was healthy, Scott?
Actually, I don't think it was, randomly enough. Go figure. But I think the point that I'm making is Jonathan Stewart has all of the tools of a complete back, but is in a terrible situation and has had a terrible track record of injuries. I don't really know what the point I'm making is from a fantasy perspective. I've always been suckered in by Stewart. I still have him in dynasty formats. I think he's a very good player. I think eventually D'Angelo Williams or Jonathan Stewart is going to be off the Panthers, but by then it may be too late to get anything out of them. But if we end up in a situation where one random week the Panthers are without D'Angelo Williams, I think Stewart's a top 20 back that week, and I think he's a relevant fantasy option from that respect.
Oh, I agree. I mean, he's one of those guys that has just teased fantasy owners pretty much as long as he's been in the league. And it seems like it's always the same time of year. It's always like a week or two before the season starts that you hear of some injury to Jonathan Stewart that's going to knock him out for the first 6 to 8 weeks.
Okay, next topic. This is courtesy of you. The Giants. Oh my God, they're terrible, right?
Yeah, I think the word I had on our notes was yikes. So.
Okay. I didn't watch, but they got shut out by the Texans, I believe, right? The 2-14 Texans.
Right. All three strings got shut out. So.
Okay, to be clear, though, we've talked about how I think the Texans and you think the Texans are a bit of a bounce-back defensive team, at least, right? Because of some of their draft picks, et cetera. But is there anything at all going on the Giants that has you interested in their fantasy players? Or are they bad enough that you're out on Rashad Jennings and Andre Williams? Or what about Victor Cruz?
You know, I'll say this. I think Rashad Jennings has value. I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that he's the best guy there. I'm not in the Andre Williams camp just yet. I don't think Andre Williams is going to take a lot away from Rashad Jennings, but Eli just looks bad, man. Like, I mean, they're doing nothing but short passes because the offensive line is so weak that they don't have time. They don't have time to get their receivers downfield, which is a very scary thought. So everything is just really quick, out of the snap, and it's very concerning. It's very concerning. So, and look, I've said this before. As Eli goes, that offense goes. So, if Eli is struggling big time, I don't see a receiver there that I think is going to be a wide receiver one for anyone.
But, I mean, if they don't have any time, doesn't that mean Victor Cruz is going to get all the targets because he's the guy that's open shortest?
And yeah, and if Eli can get him the ball quickly enough, sure, I guess he could. But yeah, it's just very concerning. And look, I think I give credit to Ben McAdoo, the new offensive coordinator, for at least recognizing their weaknesses and trying to work around them. But they're going to have to learn fast. And even the last couple of days, Coughlin has said, look, we probably aren't going to get this down until a couple games into the season, and that's not really something you want to hear this close to the opening week. So, yeah, it scares me all over the place there.
Okay, so wide receiver Corey Washington, 3 preseason touchdowns, quite a bit of yards. Do we have like a new Victor Cruz in the making potentially?
No. I think it's the short answer. Look, I see what people see in him. I mean, he's 6'4", he's like 214. He's got the measurables, and he sort of got that story of, he went to a small school, he went undrafted, nobody knows him. That's great, but to me, it kind of reminds me of the Andre Holmes hype last year in Oakland, where you had a guy that the measurables were outstanding, and people just wondered, how did we miss this guy? But the bottom line is, he couldn't separate. He couldn't beat NFL caliber quarterbacks. That's just it. So, for me, if you're in a dynasty league and have some pretty deep rosters or some taxi squads, I think Washington's worth a pickup in that scenario. But if we're talking redraft leagues with 15 to 20 guys on your roster, yeah, I'm passing.
Honestly, I don't really want to own him anywhere, but I didn't buy into Victor Cruz either when he had his breakout preseason. Corey Washington went to Newberry College, which I've actually never heard of, in Division II.
Brandon Bostic went there, another super sleeper.
Another fantasy legend. Yeah, you mentioned the Andre Holmes thing. I was like, isn't that a good scenario? I feel like, isn't Holmes currently beating out James Jones or something out in Oakland? I feel like he's sort of a relevant fantasy sleeper this year.
He's not anymore. So
okay, so that's over with. It's another preseason tidbit that I missed. Like the Giants were terrible.
Right.
So.
We'll get you caught up to speed by the end of the show, Scott. It'll be
okay. Good. I appreciate it. This is really helpful for me. So apparently Stephon Ridley fumbled again. Is that true? Is he?
Yeah, it is.
That's depressing.
Although,
I feel like
it's funny. He got benched, which like everyone saw coming. But now there's like debate on, did he get benched for fumbling? Did he get benched just because he had already played too much? I mean, there's whatever you want to chalk it up to. The bottom line is he still fumbles. He's still fumbling the ball. So, and I guarantee you the first time he fumbles in the regular season will be the last time because he will not go back in. So, now at the same time, this was a perfect opportunity for James White, the rookie out of Wisconsin, to sort of claim that role there. The first time Ridley faltered, but White hasn't really looked good either. I mean, he's kind of looked average, if I say so myself. So I think Ridley is hanging on by a thread, but it's a very, very short thread. Very short thread.
I mean, 2.6 yards per carry for White. Isn't that well below average, in fact? I'm not sure if that's an enticing thing.
LeGarrette Blount wasn't blowing the doors off last season either, and that I
He
don't
was
know
versus Indianapolis.
so.
Oh man.
But
Well,
yeah,
I
so
think
I
I've
think I would still take Ridley at this point if I had to choose, but I think that leash is very, very short.
I think I've ranted about this before about how I think Ridley didn't have a fumbling problem and then Bill Belichick created it with all of the circus.
Well, and I was talking about this the other day. I think because Ridley is a very good talent. I mean, that's why he's there. I think on any other team, and this goes to your point. I think on any other team, we're not talking about this. This isn't an issue. Even if he did fumble that many times, I don't think any other team would be that quick to bench him, right? But he's on the one team with the one coach that is just the most no-nonsense of all no-nonsense coaches. So, look, I think any other team, Stephen, we don't have this conversation about Stephen Ridley, but with your New England Patriots, I think it's an issue.
I mean, I think Bill Belichick is the most nonsense of all the coaches, but maybe that's just my outsider's perspective. I mean, I honestly don't think that Ridley is going to get benched. He may get benched in individual games, but I bet if he fumbles, he may be done for the day, but he'll be back to next week because he's the best big back that they have on the team. And, I mean, it's pointless to hold a fumble against him if he's the player that's best going to help you win games down the line. So I imagine sanity is going to prevail there in the long term. That doesn't really mean that I like Ridley necessarily as a fantasy option this year because I think it's a crowded situation. I think Vereen's going to be a relevant player, but they all kind of eat into each other, and it could be an issue. But, yeah, I mean, we've sort of talked that point to death, so we should probably move on from there. Travis Kelce, tight end for the Kansas City Chiefs. He has had a very nice preseason, 6 catches for 136 and 2 touchdowns. He's currently the number 20 tight end in the Pro Football Focus ranks. What do you think?
Travesty, Scott.
I think that's way too, okay. They probably haven't updated it in the last couple of days. But just looking at the list, in shallower formats, so one where the penalty for drafting a tight end that busts is basically 0, I definitely prefer Kelce over Heath Miller, Charles Clay, Delaney Walker, Antonio Gates. In front of that, I have a hard time picking him over some of the other guys. I mean, there are other relevant sleepers with huge upside in that range, like Ladarius Green and Zach Ertz, that I prefer over Kelce. Is there anyone else you think he deserves to be over?
Martellus Bennett, I think.
Oh, wow. Be over him. Really? I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I mean, I think in Chicago it's just gotten too crowded for Bennett, personally. I mean, he's still good. And I'm not doubting he's not a relevant fantasy player anymore, but yeah, I think Kelce, is going to be at worst the second option in that passing game before too long. And look, Alex Smith and Vernon Davis had a very good thing in San Francisco, so I see that continuing in Kansas City.
So I mean, you're saying that Santonio Holmes is gonna push aside Martellus Bennett up in Chicago?
Hey man, he did it well. No, but
okay, just to be clear,
I think for me in Chicago, it's Marshall, Forte, Jeffrey, and not necessarily in that order, but definitely those 3 guys, I think, get fed first before Bennett. In Kansas City, you have maybe Jamal Charles, and that's it. I mean, you've got Dwayne Bowe, which I saw somebody tweet today, and I'm not taking credit, and I wish I could remember, but I believe, they targeted Bowe like 13% of the time when they were up, and then 25% of the time when they were down, or something along those lines. So, it's not like Dwayne Bowe is the dominant force there to begin with. So.
I mean, I suppose that's true, but Kelce wasn't an option for the team last year, and it's not like those passing yards were just all over the place for other players.
He had a microfracture, though. That's the thing. He was injured all year.
Yeah. I'm not blaming Kelce, but I'm just saying that those yards aren't really there right now.
Sure.
And maybe Kelce's excellence will create them, but to me, there's just a huge difference between the quality of the Bears' passing game and the quality of the Chiefs' passing game. So I definitely think Bennett is the better tight end, but over the long term, yeah, I mean, in dynasty formats, I think that's a very relevant argument because Kelce's young and he's big and he's fast. So I like him.
And the funny part is, in dynasty formats especially, I mean, this was sort of a perfect storm, meaning it's not many years you've got 3 tight ends, 3 rookie tight ends that had this much hype going into the season. And with Kelce missing all of last year, it sort of pushed him to the back of the line. I mean, you have not heard anything about Kelce until the preseason game started. And now, sure, his bandwagon is filling up pretty quickly, but yeah, I mean, I think it allowed a lot of people to pick him up at a pretty good value heading into these games.
Michael, we're getting to the point where there's quite a few sleeper and quality tight ends because of the nature of the evolving NFL, right? I mean, what does this do for your overall opinion of tight ends? Are you just not going to draft them highly anymore? I mean, since there's so many options?
You know, I think there's definitely your elite options. I mean, your Jimmy Graham, who's, let's face it, in a tier by himself. But yeah, after that, it's a pretty tight bunch of tight ends, quite honestly. I mean, especially in dynasty formats, I think you've got at least the top 10 or 12 that you could mix and match pretty easily, don't you think?
I absolutely do. And I mean, frankly, I think this is hurting values of guys like Jimmy Graham too, because a few years ago, you would be lucky to get 500 yards and 5 scores out of your tight ends if you didn't draft one early. And now you can have Zach Ertz for free, and I'm not really sure how much better Graham's going to be than Zach Ertz this year,
right,
and guys along those lines. So, you know, I just think the shallow formats, you really don't need to worry about tight end that much, personally. Okay, Green Bay, tight end situation. This is one from you. You're telling me that Richard Rodgers is going to win that job. Do you care?
Yeah, I think so. I think Jermichael Finley was a great talent, but I think he did that position a disservice, quite honestly. I think it could have been a lot more, and I think it could be a lot more. And look, there was a lot of hype with Brandon Bostic at the end of last season and heading into this season, and quite frankly, he probably had the job until even a couple days or weeks ago when he had a lower leg injury that he suffered in the preseason. So that sort of cleared the way for Richard Rodgers, who, look, everyone assumes Andrew Corliss is going to be the inline blocking tight end. No one doubts that. But there's still the matter of who's going to be the passing tight or the catching tight end. And at least right now, it looks like Rodgers. I mean, there was some talk of Cole Laierla, earlier this preseason. He hasn't really done anything to take that position. And Rodgers has really, I think, solidified himself as the most reliable option at this point. So, yeah, and in that offense, I think he's definitely worth a flyer.
Honestly, I think I'm a little bit beyond caring. I was waiting for one of these guys to actually win the job as opposed to not lose the job, I guess.
Right.
And I feel like there's still not a definitive answer there, and because of that, I'm just going to look elsewhere. I feel like the Packers have plenty of options at other positions that they're not going to be starving for offense and demanding that a tight end be out there catching touchdowns for them. So
sure.
I just, in dynasty formats, if you have a very deep kind of tight end pool, maybe you have to start 2 or 3 tight ends, sure. But otherwise, considering all the other tight end options that we've been talking about, I really have a hard time believing that he's draftable in virtually any format at this point.
Right.
Let's see. Arizona wide receivers. John Brown has had quite an impressive rookie preseason. Is he getting to move towards your fantasy radar at all, Michael?
For redraft, I still find it pretty hard, especially if we're talking these like 15 roster leagues. But he's getting close, quite honestly. I mean, I think they're probably going to run a lot of 3-wide sets. And look, Andre Roberts got signed away in the offseason. He's not there anymore. So that opened up a spot. And I think a guy like Brown, by all accounts, is really running with that spot. And look, I think it's pretty clear Michael Floyd's going to be the number 1 guy there. They're going to have Larry Fitzgerald, still an awesome receiver, but I think he's not going to be as outside and down the field as nearly as much as he was. And I think a guy like Brown is probably a superior talent than an Andre Roberts. So yeah, I'm probably getting close to redraft leagues, and I'm certainly looking in dynasty leagues.
Yeah, I haven't updated my dynasty rankings in a while, but Brown would be rising them. You mentioned Andre Roberts. At his peak in 2012, 64 catches, 759 yards, and 5 touchdowns. I think Brown could do that in maybe a year. Probably not expecting quite that level of production this season, but sure. I think he's interesting, and in a redraft league, I can definitely imagine a situation where I would want to use him during a bye week at the very least. So I think he's becoming fantasy relevant. But you take that back about Larry Fitzgerald not being the number 1 wide receiver on this team. I'm completely outraged.
I know.
The Falcons' offensive line, total disaster still. Sam Baker out for the season, the presumed left tackle for the team. They were the 3rd worst pass blocking team last year and 10th worst run blocking team. How bad is this for Steven Jackson and potentially Devontae Freeman?
Well, look, there's nowhere to go but up, right? Like
Well,
even before the Sid Baker injury, they couldn't get a whole lot worse. And look,
can they?
well, we're gonna find out. But look, I do think Matthews is an upgrade a lot. Look, he was one of the most ready-made guys from this draft class. So I think just having him is going to be a help. I don't think it's going to like vault them to the top half of pass blocking rankings or run blocking rankings. But look, I think it'll be an improvement, and I think if they can just hold the line long enough for a guy like Ryan to get the ball out, I think they'll be okay. They're not going to be stellar, obviously, but I don't know. I think they'll be okay.
This isn't exactly a fantasy question, but how many games are the Falcons going to win this year?
Oh, it's so hard to not be like teased by their season 2 years ago when they almost ran the table. But I'd probably go 9. I'd say 9-7.
Okay, I think they're going to win 5 games.
Okay.
They have no talent left on defense.
God, we are just all over the place.
They have Julio Jones, who's an incredible player. They have Matt Ryan, who's a very nice player. Where else is the talent on this team? How different are they than the Giants? Honest question. Where do they have real assets on the team that I just feel like the roster's terrible. I mean,
yeah, I think they have a lot of promising guys. Okay, so they've got Warlow in the linebacking core, who by all accounts I think is probably going to be a stud. They did draft.
And we probably don't need to get into an IDP topic, but is he good, or is he just able to get so many tackles because of the other lack of talent around him?
I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, he still produced last year, even when Sean Weatherspoon came back. So, and given now Sean Weatherspoon's out for the entire year. So,
Exactly.
yeah, I think he's pretty good. They drafted, I believe it wasn't Jernigan, it was Rashad Hagman, I think, for the defensive line. So, look, I think they're going to be okay. I think 9-7 for me is probably top end, but I could just as easily see 5 games. I think 5 to 9 is a pretty good range there.
Okay. A couple more topics before we close for the evening. Bryce Brown. He's had a very big preseason for the Bills. Given that C.J. Spiller sort of failed to live up to expectations last season, I think people are maybe willing to consider that Brown could be the future here. Let's talk about from a dynasty perspective. Where do you see Brown going forward? Is he a long-term starter in the league? Where would you have him among your dynasty running backs in a ranking sense?
He's right up there as far as handcuffs or second running backs go on teams for me. I think there's a very real possibility he's the starter in Buffalo next year, quite honestly. I think they probably finally rid themselves of C.J. Spiller. I mean, and you got to look at it this way. Either he has a very good season and is going to want to break the bank, which I don't think Buffalo intends to do, or he has another subpar season and they go, look, we're going to move on. We're going to give the job to Brown, who, look, they give up a 4th-round pick in this year's draft. That's not chicken feed when you're talking about NFL draft picks and trades. So, I think he's starter caliber, Bryce Brown, and I think there's a very good shot he's the starter next year.
I'm desperately trying to look up something while you're talking right now. I agree that Brown is definitely a long-term value. I like him a lot. It looked like me and Joey Cardilano had him ranked the highest among our staffers. We both have him as a top 50 running back in Dynasty, and we were the highest on him in overall ranking. So I don't really consider him a handcuff because I feel like there are multiple pieces in front of him right now. But again, that's something that could sort of go away next season. Fred Jackson eventually will have to retire.
No, he won't.
I mean,
no, he won't, Scott.
Maybe not. Let's not pretend. Don't pretend that C.J. Spiller didn't have a really good year last year. He averaged 4.6 yards per carry. Granted, that's not the 6 that he did in 2012, but Spiller is an incredible player. So I don't agree with you from that sense, but I do think Brown himself is a very talented player. I think we got a glimpse of that in his time as the Eagles starter briefly when McCoy was down. I guess that was maybe 2 years ago at this point. I don't know when it was, but I feel like there was a personality issue is the reason he's no longer with the Eagles, and I fully expect him to become a starting running back in the future. Okay, I think we have one more question here, right? Tampa Bay's quarterback situation. I have no idea what's been going on here. Has Josh McCown, the often forgotten by me player, has he not been living up to the free agent contract so far this preseason?
Well, okay, so I have his stat line here. The first game was just really bad, quite honestly. Now, given, it's not all Josh McCown's fault. I mean, that offensive line is also not the strongest. It's almost Falconian, if I can
there you go.
coin a phrase. So it wasn't all his fault. Now, he did recover in the second preseason game. I mean, it didn't have a turnover. So, but for me, it's just more about Mike Glennon looking good. And quite honestly, Mike Glennon had a good season last year. I mean, he really did. I don't understand why, quite honestly, why Tampa was so quick to replace him. So for me, I truly believe Glennon is the starter by the end of the year, and especially in dynasty formats, I think he's a great long-term value, especially with the personnel in place there. So I think you're playing with fire if you're rolling with Josh McCown in either redraft or dynasty leagues this year.
But as the presumed starter, I think that definitely creates value if you think Glennon has long-term value. So now is probably the best time to buy him during his entire career.
Definitely. Look, for some reason, Tampa's not giving it to him lightly. So, take advantage while you can, I guess.
Okay. I think that pretty much clears up everything we wanted to talk about tonight, Michael. I do want to tell the crowds out there that if they remember last year, we did a Reality Sports Online fantasy league. It's this really cool dynasty format. I mean, honestly, I think it's probably my favorite fantasy football format these days. They're not paying me, I assure you. I just really think that. Luckily, Michael was able to pick up and join the league this year, replacing our own Pat Thorman, who we've given way too much work to do at the site. So he doesn't have time for that. But, I mean, how do you like it so far, Michael? We've been going through our rookie draft. We're way behind, but we need to get our auction going. But are you enjoying things so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think I told you before, I think, like fantasy, just football in general, thanks to my many years of playing the franchise mode on Madden on either the PlayStation 1, 2, 3, or 4. So, and this league that we're in now is the closest I think that gets to that. I mean, you have obviously the rookie draft, but you also have a salary cap that you have to adhere to, and you sign guys for multiple years. And hey, if you sign the wrong guy to some long-term deal, it's just like the real NFL. You're kind of stuck with that. So. I'm still wrapping my head around it. I'm trying to figure out if tagging Jordy Nelson is a good idea or not. But I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, and again, that league is filled by a couple of us fantasy staffers. Brian Fontaine's still involved as well. But then otherwise, it's fantasy slant listeners. So if any of you guys are listening, we really appreciate you listening to the show every week, and we hope that everyone else enjoys these shows with Michael and me. That'll about do it for this week, but we'll be back again next week. It's possible that I'll watch a preseason game, Michael. I mean, it's happened before, and then maybe we can actually talk about it next time.
Well, let me know which one, so we can at least talk about the same one.
Okay, that sounds like a plan. Thanks, everybody, for listening in. This is another episode of the Fantasy Slant. For Michael Moore, this is Scott Spratt, and we'll talk to you next week.